Hello, and welcome to this week's extra boring episode of Pilot Light, a podcast where, for some unknown reason, we watch the first episode of a Netflix series, which is shite, and then we talk about it. My name's David, and have you ever wondered what a TV show starring boring, unlikable people shot in a dark, colour-drained palette doing not very much is like? Well, wonder no longer!
I've got a similar theme going on. My name's Sam, and the boring of Hill House. Am I right?
You are. My name's Joe, and I have one foot in crazy and the other on a banana peel.
Someone throw it by.
Is that a quote for this episode?
Yes.
Fucking who could know? So this week we watched The Haunting of Hill House, which we should say off the top, and maybe let's get this out of the way, is quite a critically acclaimed horror TV show that aired on Netflix in October of 2018. It's 10 episodes, which is something odd for us. It's 10 episodes, and then that's it. They've made a spin-off series, but as far as The Haunting of Hill House goes, this is 10 hours of television, and that's it.
10 hours of your life you're not getting back. We should say the critical acclaim as well. It's by some big names. So people like Stephen King and Quentin Tarantino have both given it really good reviews.
What does Stephen King know about horror?
Yes.
Love this TV show.
Yes. So that should tell you everything you need to know.
Dave, you said at the beginning that for some reason we're watching this show, and I know we are a non-recrimination podcast. However, I just have to flag up there is a reason that we're watching this, and this is because Joe picked it. So what the fuck, Joe?
To excuse Joe, and I'll let you come in a second, Joe. This is largely a show we watch because of the Netflix algorithm. I think. Like, this is one of the things they pushed when it came out, like they do with everything. And we do try to, when we pick TV shows, we try to do the odd thing none of us have seen, because it lets us approach it with a very neutral mindset and hate it like we hated this. But it's a clean hate, you know? There's no baggage to this hate. It's just hate for hate's sake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no reason for picking it. It was there. I was on Netflix. I saw it. I'm like, we've not done many horror shows. Let's go for it.
To be fair, that's the same principle that I picked the Living with Yourself, the Paul Rudd show, which my only quibble though, Joe, is that was 26 minutes. This is a full fucking hour, and my God, did it feel like an hour?
I didn't look at like episode length before picking it, Sam. I just saw it, went, whatever. I don't care. It's free.
Jesus. So in this show. In this show, The Haunting of Hill House, we're flashing between.
I was just going to say, first, what we should maybe say is that it is actually based on a book by Shirley Jackson, who was an author in the mid-20th century. So, who, interestingly enough, by the way, her grandmother was a Christian Science practitioner who believed she could cure people and claimed to have cured her own broken leg, but turned out it was only slightly badly strained. So,
I mean, there's a diagnosis problem there, really, isn't there?
The cure for a broken leg is time.
No, Sam. The lesson from that is the cure for a broken leg is don't break it in the first place.
That is true.
Problem solved. Cured.
Or be a crazy person. Whatever.
So, in case you haven't seen this show, it basically flashes between past and present, and we get to see a fractured family confronting the haunted memories of their old home and the terrifying events that drove them from it. So it's like a family.
Except we don't get to see any terrifying events.
No. We get to see
there's
the
a
slow
little bit
build up
right at
towards
the end. To be fair, there is like one little shot at the end that's meant to be terrifying, but isn't
in
really.
An hour, Joe, there's 4 seconds of horror.
But there is still one bit.
It's a family show, though, isn't it? It's not a family show, but it's a show about family dynamic, and it's a show about people and how these people are basically reacting and like recovering from the fact that they moved when they were children because of their dad to a haunted house who they were renovating or something.
Yeah,
loads of
I think
creepy
they
shit
built
happens.
It. Did they not build it?
No. I've got this because I was trying to follow along. And I was somewhat sober when I was watching this last night or the night before, or who could even know? So the mum and the dad are basically like, what they do is they buy houses, they renovate them, and they flip them. It's like their job. So the Hill House is like, the last house they tried to do this with, and it was haunted and all that. It's haunted. And
Homes Under the Hammer. That's what it is. Yeah.
Pretty much. These guys are like fucking.
Ghosts under the hammer.
These guys are exactly a BBC level daytime housing show.
It's Kirsty and Phil.
To talk about the plot of this episode, and I'm going to need one of you to get up the cast list when names. Joe, you're my man. So we kind of like this episode, and let's just withhold our judgment a little bit while we just unpack what's happening, because I think, especially for Sam's sake, because audience, you know what he's like. He obviously has no idea what's happening in this episode.
I mean, despite me picking this, I would say I also hated this episode. I didn't enjoy it.
We've made that clear, but let's give this a fair shake and let's make a conversation out of it, because it's reductive and boring just to say something shit. Let's tell people why it's shit. Okay. So in this episode, we are basically introduced to a family. Like Sam said, we have a series of flashbacks. We have the main guy who is a horror, true horror ghost story writer. His name, Joe, is
Stephen Crane is the character, and he's played by Mikhail Huisman or something. Never heard of him.
Huisman.
Him.
Right. What a completely bland performance. Moving on, we also meet several of his siblings. So we have his brother, who is a drug addict. I believe the character name is Toby.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get a lot of him. We mainly see it off screen. We get the sister who owns a funeral parlor.
Mm-hmm.
We have the sister who wears the gloves.
No, sorry, go back. The guy, Toby's actually Luke.
Luke, sorry, I apologize.
No, but I was like, yes, that's right, correct. Move on.
It's one of those. It's the same thing.
Who cares? Some cast people.
No, we have something here. So the sister who wears the gloves, which I was like, what's this gloves thing? Why are we focusing on this gloves thing? Guess what, guys? She's a little bit psychic. If she touches you with her bare hands, she sees things. So that's why she wears gloves. Isn't that something that would have been nice to get in this episode?
Is that nice really sort of not in the episode?
That is not in the episode. She's wearing the gloves, and she's like, I just like wearing gloves. And it's like, wouldn't it have been nice to have something interesting like that? Ooh, there's a thing here. Ooh, actually, there is something supernatural going on. Wouldn't that have been pleasant? We also have the dad, who is the dad, as we'll henceforth refer to him. And we have the final sister, who we haven't mentioned, called Nell. And she's kind of like, we're all saying Nell in this episode. Nell. Like, oh, where's Nell? Nell's calling. What's going on? Nell. She's the only character, by the way, in this episode, apart from Stephen. And I only know that because the episode is called Stephen Sees a Ghost. Right. Nell is the only character I could remember the name of after I finished watching this episode.
Yeah, it's because they say Nell about 8,000 times, and it's the only character we don't really see as, like, you know, from her point of view, I suppose, isn't it? Everyone else gets a little bit of time to say, this is who I am, and I'm doing this, and I work in a funeral parlor. All huge red flags for me, I have to say, in terms of, like, it's the tropiest trope that ever troped. This first episode. Yeah.
I mean, the cast, to be fair, I mean, I didn't really recognise any of them. I don't know if any of you guys did, but there's Carla Gugino.
Carla Gugino, yeah, she's quite semi... It's a name I know. By the way, the main guy in this, I did recognise Stephen. He plays the male lead in The Flight Attendant, which I watched about 5 episodes of and then forgot about.
Oh. Victoria Pedretti, who plays Nell, I believe. Kate Siegel.
There's no really big names in this. Like, it's all these people have got careers and have, like, done things, but there's no, like, and with Sean Bean, or I'm sure there's a bigger star than Sean Bean, but I challenge the internet to tell me one. But, like, there's no name attached to this of, like, you know, no big celebrity face to drive this home. Despite which, like we said, this is quite well received. Is there anything about this episode plot-wise we want to talk about maybe a little bit more in detail? Perhaps Stephen, and we get a lot of the Stephen stuff.
Yeah, I think this, and yeah, I think you're right. Let's try and give this a fair shake. But in contrast to that, this character, this framing of him like writing a novel, and he's a famous novelist, and he's written all these books, and he's basically going around the country exploiting people's heartfelt ghost stories in order.
America.
in order to sell his books. Now, like what I find annoying about him is that he is like pitched as this. Oh, he's a writer, and he's like plumbing the depths of the human of the ghostly spirit. He's doing all these things, and actually, he's writing like throwaway pulp. Like it doesn't, you know what I mean? It's the impact of him being this big famous writer. I don't think it sells at all when he's writing ghost stories.
He's also the most boring person in the entire world.
He's atrocious.
Everybody, the entire cast of this, and I guess it's kind of. So we talk about this in the context of being a pilot. Now, this is not a traditional pilot because it's not selling a TV show. It's not like do you like our premise? Can we have a show? This is the first installment of a 10-hour limited series. Now, for me, this is like, I need something. You need to give me some fucking reason to watch your TV show.
And it should be through Steven. That's where it should come from.
But what I think what they're trying to do is set up that all of these like siblings and the dad, they're all quite like emotionally scarred by the haunting of Hill House or whatever. But the really heavy-handed way in which they do that is no one smiles, no one's having a good time, with the exception maybe of the sister who's going out to clubs and having casual sex.
They're all absolutely they're all like completely fucked mentally. Like they all need therapy,
and that's fine. Lots of people are in that position and still like can crack a smile and like pretend, and you don't really get any of that. It's very like, especially Steven, he's very like, oh, my wife has left me, oh, none of my siblings like me, oh, I don't really like me. Honestly, he could commit suicide any second during this episode, and I would be like, oh, that seems to fit with what I've been told about his character and the performance he's giving. It's just so bleak. It's very clipped, it's very clean, it's very sanitized, and like that's obviously the aesthetic the TV show is going for, and I think maybe it pays off later in the series. That's speculation on my part, but in this episode, largely what it means is it's really hard to care about any of these characters because we don't get a lot of characterization, and it's really hard to be invested in their stories because again, they don't seem invested in themselves.
Well, you touched on the thing about it being a Netflix show, and I think that's probably one of the biggest changes that we've seen to like television production is that move from having to pitch your pilot to a studio, and then the studio says yay or no on the pilot, and you get maybe 120,000 or something to make a pilot, and then that goes through the process of like, well, should we do it? Is it good? Yes, no, green light, brilliant, you're on air, and then you get cancelled after 3 episodes because actually nobody wants to watch it. Like that traditional TV thing is so challenged by the way Netflix does business, which is find good ideas, like workshop them, and use their massive analytics to understand what people are going to watch, and then just chuck loads of money and get 10 episodes out of something. So I think it's almost that thing we spoke about it in a previous show about the kind of like the peril of doing this. The peril of making TV like this is that you can go really slow, and that's great, and you get to really warm up and build up the characters. But there is something actually quite useful about an end of episode stinger, or
having
a spark,
a hook. Now,
yes.
In the immortal words of Stan Smith, Sam, the economics of television have changed. Have it your way. I love the fact we can just quote American Dad, and we're the only people on the internet who can. So, like, the economics have changed, and you are right. And so Netflix knows that really the first episode doesn't have to be, the best episode in the series, especially for a limited series like this. That I think it's almost unfair for us to look at in the context of being a pilot. Now, it is and it isn't, because I think you are right, Sam. It still needs to, like, television at its core still needs to be something that like insists upon itself. Television is something that like needs to give you, the viewer, a reason to continue watching it, whether that's because you want to find out, what is going to happen with characters, if that's because you enjoy the cinematography or the feel of it or the sound of it or anything like that. There's got to be like an overwhelming desire for you as a viewer to continue watching this, especially in these days where I can be watching 10,000 things simultaneously. You know, do you know what I mean? At my fingertips. Like, do I really want to spend my time watching The Haunting of Hill House?
No.
On that note, though, does Netflix care that I don't want to spend my time watching The Haunting of Hill House? No, because what they want is for me to keep watching Netflix. They don't care if I watch The Haunting of Hill House, but they want me to be watching Netflix. And that's kind of like, I think maybe more where this show comes from as like this is probably targeting a fairly niche audience.
Yeah. Yeah, and as we've said before, those who did watch it fucking love it. The ratings for this are ridiculously high for a show. I mean, I don't understand it personally. Terrible.
It's possibly the biggest gulf between our opinion and the critical reception of something. I think that usually we fall much more in line with.
In fact, I think Tarantino said it's the best Netflix original to date. Which I mean, it's not, but you know.
I think a lot of this. So yeah, there's the economics of this. There's the way that it's made, and that the fact that they're not having to really grab you. It's a good point, Dave. That they get you £12 a month or whatever it is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't really matter what you watch as long as you're watching something, and that aggregated across your entire audience means that somebody's watching this, and that's enough. As long as there's somebody watching it, because that way we can.
I was just going to say, how much are they relying on you, watching this and going, well, this has to pay off at some point, and then keeping on watching, and then you get to a point where you're like, well, actually, there's only 3 episodes left. It must pay off at some point, and just keep on watching it just to get the payoff.
It's only 10 hours, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even though I'm 7 seasons into the X-Files, so what can I say?
Literally nothing, Joe.
You're an animal, Joe. You're an absolute animal.
But let's dig into why we didn't like this then, and we can maybe circle back around to
Can I start?
Ways that could be different. You can, Sam. I'm excited.
Can I start? Because I think the reason that I don't like this almost has nothing to do with this show. I think the reason I don't like this is because I don't particularly care for horror, TV show, movies, etc. I don't have that connection to the horror, kind of universe, as it were. Aesthetic. That's probably a bit. The kind of the whole package, the whole horror thing. I think I find really just doesn't connect with me. And as much as this show isn't it's not leaning on it super heavily, but it is using a lot of the stuff. So number one, we get those camera angles, and this is just I think the cinematography is all right, but we get those camera angles when you can tell there's someone behind you. And then there isn't, and you get all of this, the water phone noises and all these other things that just.
It's all shot in pitch black as well. Nobody knows how to turn on a light bulb.
It's shot in grey. Is worse. Someone put on a blue jumper. Someone wear a bit of red socks. It's kind of lending itself to it. Yeah, but I get what you mean, Sam.
So it's all of these things. I just instantly, I'm like. Okay, I don't connect to it. I do not connect to it, and that I think is straight away a problem, And so when they're creating horror shows, I think what they need to do is they need to let's give me something new. Give me something new, please. That we can...
In some ways, though, and I don't want to keep going back to the ratings that it has, but clearly what they've actually done is supported by the fans of the genre. So in some ways, you've got to kind of give them credit because they've basically, instead of trying to appease an audience that they wouldn't normally get and try and kind of go for a wider audience, they've actually appeased the audience that want this show, and they've just it's like fan service almost, I would guess. But I'm kind of with you. Horror isn't really something I go out to watch. I've seen bits of it. It's fine. It's not that entertaining. It's kind of the slow build and stuff like that, which I don't enjoy, which this 100% does. Absolutely nothing happens in this episode at all until 30 seconds from the end, where it turns out his sister that stood in a room with him, spoilers, is dead. And then
she's dead off screen, by the way, in this fucking horror TV show.
Yeah.
Great start.
This sister who's he thought was in the room with him does the whole scream face thing and then disappears. And but the other thing with it as well is how many times do you see somebody wake up from a nightmare in this? It's basically an hour of people waking up.
Yeah,
12 times.
It's a lot. So I kind of fall maybe like as usual more on the like I'm gonna say artsy, and I don't really mean that, but I'm someone who enjoys
filthy
like
centrist.
I'm someone who like
fence.
what I would say is I'm more what's the word? I'm more like an more of an omnivore.
You can kind of appreciate it and the making of it a bit
I
more.
can sit and watch, like I would say probably any genre of TV and like enjoy it. I'm not as like the horror genre. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I do appreciate it, and it's always nice to see like a job done well, even if it's not necessarily like your ideal story. Now that's where this show kind of like not falls down as such, but the cinematography in this is only okay, and obviously they aren't trying to do a lot, and that's fine. I don't agree with the color palette because I don't think necessarily that grayscale is scary, like Hollywood thinks grayscale is scary. But like for me, the biggest sin of this isn't necessarily all the horror tropes, which I'm okay with largely. It's the fact that none of it pays off. You watch an hour of this TV show and you don't really feel like you've learned much. There's a couple of tidbits. There's a couple of like, I am interested. I'm like, oh, what? How is the house haunted? Like, are all these siblings a bit psychic? Because that's certainly what it tells us. And from reading the wiki, one of them it definitely is psychic. Like, I am interested in the mechanics of the supernatural in this series, but we don't really get told enough in this episode for me to be like, oh, I wonder. And that might be enough to make someone like me think, oh, maybe I'll watch some more of that. But if you've lost me as a viewer and Joe, who's watched 4 seasons of Heroes and 18 seasons of The X-Files, like who are you getting? People who have had a stroke and can't reach the remote. Like who?
My dear friends who will trudge through swamps, endless festering swamps of television for just the barest payoff.
We are truly pioneers.
Just the scraps.
I mean, can you go on about like X-Files and Heroes? Can I just say probably the most embarrassing thing that I've watched to the end is still probably Star Trek the animated series, and there's only 20-minute episodes of that. I'd probably watch season 4 of Heroes over that. 100%.
Just wait till you get to Enterprise.
Yeah, you've got faith of the heart. As usual, welcome. Star Trek
Welcome
podcast.
to our Star Trek podcast. We need to spend time with different people, Dave.
The Haunting of the Star Trek Enterprise.
Great episode.
This TV show. There's a lot I like in this, and I do mean, and I know this will be a shorter conversation, but there are certain things I like in this. I like a lot of the flashback stuff. I don't like almost any of the quote-unquote modern-day stuff, but I like how they handle quite a lot of the flashbacks. I feel like the way that it's presented as like a childhood memory of being quite not unconnected and quite like we're just seeing like through windows. It's kind of how childhood memory works, and I think it's a really good commentary on that, where Steven's sort of remembering like, oh, that was a time when this happened, and then at another time, we don't know if it's before or after the first time, like this other thing happened, and I like that. I think they tread that really well. I'm not necessarily saying that the flashbacks go anywhere, but I like how they're framed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of the stuff with like probably is when it shows the family as a young family living in the house probably is the bit more fascinating aspect of the episode. I mean, it's
the only interesting aspect.
Yeah, but then there's little things within it as well that like obviously will have a payoff probably later on. Like there's a room that they're in the house and never been able to get into, and they get given the master key by some guy who clearly works there.
That was the one thing in the episode I was like, what the fuck's behind this door? I need to know what's behind this door.
Even the master key doesn't open the door, so there's obviously like they're going to get through this door at some point, and they're going to find what's in there, and you'll be like, "Holy fuck!"
And it's scary door.
Then there's that really weird like Christian woman who like lectures them on like Christianity and stuff at one point as well, isn't there? It's a really strange scene.
And I like that. I like off the wall kind of weird oddities and like, oops, something's not right here, but we don't quite know what. That as a basis for a series I could get into, but it's all this dreary fucking people looking at iPhones thing that makes me want to put a bullet in my head.
Yeah, it's kind of baffling that they haven't as a family.
Hate shots
iPhones.
of people looking at not iPhones, Joe. I just hate shots of people looking at mobiles and going and they're not saying, "Oh, why is Nell calling?" I prefer them to say, "Oh, such and such is calling me," to nobody, than to fucking pan and see a shot of like.
Do you like what about the ones when they have it on the screen? It pops up like floating, like a theory, like a text message.
That is not even as bad. I think like it's bad, but it's not as bad as this.
Yeah,
which just feels like product placement. It really, really feels like buy an iPhone.
You know,
iPhone.
I hate when they're on phone calls and the screen is on. Clearly not on a phone call, because if you put it up to your ear, it turns the screen off. That annoys me. It takes me out of everything. Yeah. But anyway, phone gripes. Things that I liked about this, I like the fact that Stephen doesn't believe in ghosts. I think that's like a funny twist, and that when he goes to the woman's house who saw her dead husband hanging from the ceiling and there's dripping, and like in the most, as someone who doesn't believe in ghosts at all, in the most shit-eating way possible, he basically just says, "Yeah, so you felt a drip on your head, I think you've got a leak," and I keep hearing like the brakes screeching because my husband died in a car crash. Well, they did have a stop sign out there, but now it's gone, so you're probably just hearing that. And you're like, the guy is just completely shitting all over this woman's experience, which I found very funny. Probably not the intention.
No, probably not.
and then the best bit, he goes, yeah, but I could probably turn your story into a novel. It's not really clear how anyone's going to get paid. Is she going to get paid money for this? Or is it just going to be...
It feels very much like he's a shyster. Like, not a shyster, but like you see the shelf of all his books. He's got like 10 books. He makes his living like going, interviewing people, like hearing their stories and then writing it as like an anthology series. Like,
Can I just say though, like, that doesn't sound like a very difficult concept to come up with without having to get it from a husband, from the woman.
Like, he couldn't think this up in his head.
He couldn't think of a wife who had a husband die in a car crash and then saw visions of him. Like that.
We literally have a flashback as well to when he first wrote the book about Hill House. And he said it to his sister. We literally had the flashback like, I was trying to be a writer. They didn't want my novels. And it's like the implication, like, because you have absolutely zero creativity. What else can I do? Get another job? No. I've got to write about things that have happened so I don't have to think of anything.
They say, write what you know. And I know haunted houses and family despair. That's all I can do. He
doesn't believe in haunted houses. Yeah, apparently he has no imagination and writes a book about a woman whose husband died. But then he has to give her money. So how's about you just come up with that fucking idea without having to speak to her? Then you don't have to pay her.
Joe, I think what you're trying to imply there is coming up with creative thoughts, and obviously this man who is so dead inside that there's nothing behind his eyes in this entire episode, and it's a big problem.
I think probably this podcast is evidence to that as well. To be honest, but...
the only one of these the siblings that you kind of go, you know what, you're probably the one that's actually accurate is the one who's like an addict. You're like, you know what? If you've had this so much of a disjointed childhood, you probably would be an addict. You're right. Yeah, you would need like some.
That I think is quite like not disrespectful of addiction, but like it's a fucking easy trope. Like,
it is.
One of them's now a drug addict, and he's in rehab. Like, fuck off. Like, develop this character. Like, he can, obviously people are drug addicts and things, but like, it just feels like an easy cheat. Like, oh, he's had trauma and now he's a drug addict. Like, there are lots of reasons people get addicted to drugs, mostly because drugs are really addictive, not necessarily because their house was haunted.
I thought you were going to say because drugs are great.
Also, no, they are. They are great. That's why they're really addictive. They aren't great when you take loads of them, though.
No, my point being, not necessarily the fact that he's a drug addict, but it's more my point being that this Stephen character isn't really dysfunctional. He's just nothing. He has nothing. There's nothing about him that makes him interesting. Absolutely nothing. He has no...
He is kind of like an audience analog a little bit because he doesn't believe in ghosts. So he's kind of like, he's kind of giving you a way in almost to think through his view of what's happening. And then as at the very end of the episode, we see the ghost of Nell, with the scream, vamp face from Buffy or whatever it is that happens
Ridges.
to her. Ridges,
She's a
like
Klingon, Sam. Don't be so disrespectful.
She's a Klingon. Star Trek cast.
She's an original series Klingon. Yeah. Every time we'll get
just
Star
a big
Trek
moustache.
But I will try and claw back the fact that I did start this discussion based on something that I do like. It veered off pretty quickly. Other things that I like, I actually quite like the cinematography in this. I think there's some like interesting shots. It's very still. It kind of like it using the scenery lots to try and kind of show the desolation that lives within these people's lives and all this stuff, which is
it's very cast light, I should say. There's not a lot of extras in this. You very rarely get a shot where, with the exception of that nightclub scene, there are no shots of like people walking in the background. It's all one or two characters in a room by themselves.
Yeah, and it
it's shot with an intentionality, isn't it? I think is what you're getting at. Like, you can tell someone's really thought about the way that they're trying to portray these people, and they're doing so boringly because that's what they're trying to do. Like, but that's kind of it's one of those things where like I don't really like the result, but you went for something and you got there. Like A+ for like having a brief and then matching that brief, but unfortunately, I find it pretty boring.
One thing that it has, maybe I am kind of interested to see what happens with the house. So I have no desire to watch the show, but it does kind of make me want to read the book. Maybe I think the book could be quite cool. Yeah, but no, I'm not going to near this TV show.
No, I've got loads of books I'm not reading. I mean, I've got no real desire to add this to that.
I read all the time, Dave. That's the difference.
Yeah, me too. Just mostly Wikipedia.
Should we quickly talk about the creator of this, Mike Flanagan, who is quite a big horror guy. So he's been involved in various different horror.
He's done quite a few Stephen King, hasn't he? I think.
Yes. So I think he's got a lot of praise from people like Stephen King, Tarantino, as we've said, and I think he's considered a kind of bit like a new wave horror producer, in that I don't think he has that same reliance on the kind of tropes that I was complaining about at the beginning. Like, and I don't want to overstate that. It's not like it's crazily bad, but I think it's just so that horror kind of like feel is so deep seated into the way that this TV is made. And yet I still I don't see anything here that's like original, which is kind of, you maybe have to put it onto a guy who knows horror that well, that he's a little bit too immersed in it. And so even trying to do something that isn't as horror, kind of reliant in terms of those filmmaking techniques, you still fall into that. You still have, there's, the bit when it's horrible. I hate it. There's a bit where at the end, the ghost Nell is there and basically have a shot where she's moved all the way across the room in one go with there's no way that she could have ran it. She's not like hulking across to get in. She just turns up, snap, and she's there right in front. I just hate that. I hate it because it's so predictable and it doesn't make you jump. It just makes you go, oh, that's that shot that you see in movies all the time where someone turns around and they're right next to you. Like, all of that.
It's about the intention of the horror as well, I suppose. Like,
yeah.
In reference to horror books, which I've maybe read, I've maybe read more horror than I've watched. I just generally because, I'm just not that impressed by really gory movies or really jumpy movies. I don't want to sit and you to try and scare me for 2 hours. I kind of need to be entertained. What I enjoy more about the horror genre is kind of what's the word? It being a little bit unsettling. I like to be unsettled rather than oh, there's a ghost. And in this, it's just, there's no underlying tension in any of this. It's not unsettling. And obviously that's because they're not attempting to make it that way. But, ultimately there's one big jump scare at the end. And
it's a ridiculously slow build. The bit I'd be interested in is knowing more about the ghost and the house. That's the bit I'm interested in. That's what I want to know about. Not this terribly dysfunctional family. Who cares? Fuck them.
These characters. Make these characters not even likable. Likable is maybe the wrong word. Make me care about these characters. That's the biggest flaw here. Is kind of like, if I care about the characters, I'm kind of on board for the adventure, whether whether it's my exact notion of what I want to watch or not. Like, if I care about these people, if I care about Stephen and his life and his whatever, then it's like, oh, I must get all this money to pay for such and such. That's something we're aiming towards. That's something we're going for. In this, like, it seems like he's attempting to stave off his inevitable suicide, and like his sister pips him to the post. That's seemingly what is happening here, and it's kind of like, well, I don't care then. These people have checked out. Why am I here?
Fuck him. Kill them all off and give me evil Casper.
Spoilers for the end. I think the dad does kill himself. To be like reunited with the mom.
Because they just. Fucking... I mean, we haven't gone into any of the plot here because there barely is any. But basically,
we didn't get anything.
I'm just going to mention that they when they flee the house that's haunted, they leave the mother there. Like,
do they though? I don't know if they say that outright because
I think she kills herself. Like, that's
because
what happens.
They say the sister says, like, mum is mentally ill. Like, when he publishes the book. Present tense, and I don't know if that's I would be very surprised if that's a writing flub or a production flub.
Oh, really?
Because I was like, she says, mum is mentally ill, not mum was mentally ill. Like, mum is mentally ill, so I'm not like convinced the mum did die in 1992, which is when they fled. I
don't know that she died, but they definitely left her when they fled initially. They might be that they went back and found her or whatever, or she got out.
She might be in a mental home or something.
Yeah, but they definitely leave with it. They definitely just abandon her and like, fuck it, leave her. She's gone.
Kind of doesn't really tell. It doesn't confirm a lot. You get a lot of like.
Tells you nothing.
It tells you nothing outright, which is kind of like you need something. You need something outright here that's like.
I know that horror is about slow builds, and I know it's about building tension, and I know it's like sort of about raising expectation and that sort of a thing. But there's a line between doing that and putting people to sleep, and this is the wrong side of that for me.
Well, as usual, like the aim of a TV show is to make you want to watch more of it, and like this couldn't have been worse for that. I wouldn't have finished watching it if it wasn't for the podcast. I know you wouldn't have done, Sam.
After 7 minutes, I was like, okay, there we go. Still got quite a lot of this left to go after 7 minutes, which is even for me, with my terrible attention span, is quite bad. However, let's just finish on a positive thing that I think we maybe haven't.
We never have to watch this again.
That is true.
Yeah.
Like just some of the thematic stuff in this, and obviously, like you'd say, the core theme of the show is like an exploration of grief, isn't it? Like whether or not these people lived in a haunted house, or whether that's just a construct in their minds, as Stephen says to the woman who saw her dead husband, like. The mind's a powerful thing, and like you can interpret, and you can actually even create things that you see because it's an easier explanation in your head than having to deal with like the grief of your mum killing herself and all this stuff. Like, I think there is probably throughout the series quite an interesting and thoughtful exploration of that. You can see the impact it's had on this family. Like, they're all absolutely fucked, and all of them need to go to therapy. They need to have extensive sessions of therapy to get over whatever's happened. Now, channel that through a horror show, and you might have ghosts or whatever. But I kind of like, I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate taking a slower burn to really explore that. And then maybe at the end there is a satisfying conclusion. I'm not going to find out, but maybe there is.
Yeah. I mean,
the critical at some point.
The critical reception leads me to believe that, like, as usual, like when you finish watching something like this, especially with a 10-hour run, like you probably think of it much more as like a whole than you would as, well, I liked that episode and I didn't like that episode, much more so than your typical 24 episode sort of like American season,
like a big movie.
Exactly. So, like, and also, if the ending's really good and some of the later part and the middle part's good, like, you wouldn't really remember that the first hour was boring as fuck. And obviously, that's where we sit. However, in terms of our podcast and to, like, keep us consistent, out of every single pilot we've done, this is the one that like I felt the least compulsion to watch any more of. Two Broke Girls, I watched half of episode 2 without really realizing it was a different episode. Like, but that's where we're at, because that is a TV show that gives you things to care about, gives you reasons to invest in these characters, and tells a story. And this hour of television doesn't really do that.
In that case, in Two Broke Girls' case, mostly jokes about female anatomy. You know, like that was
not saying it's good, not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's doing something.
More boob jokes. That's what this show needs.
Somebody throw a pie.
Someone throw a pie. That is our go-to, isn't it? That is our go-to. But so yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks for a wasted hour and 40 minutes that we've spent talking about this. But we will get our revenge one day, I'm sure.
Yeah, and if anyone, obviously as usual, if anyone has any comments, like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Joe, I realise you haven't really said what you think, so
I think I have over the course of the podcast, to be fair.
No one's in any doubt.
He's shamed into silence. That's good. I'm glad.
Absolutely not. I have absolutely no plans
I'm
whatsoever.
with Joe here. I feel like, we kind of, it's nice to do something a bit different. I do wish it wasn't an hour long. Maybe let's get the admin working on like not doing an hour for the pilot on a Wednesday evening. But apart from the length, like it was interesting to do this. It's interesting to do something different,
and it's an interesting conversation to have about the history and kind of like the
if only any of us were interesting or talented, eh?
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is probably like next week. It is Love, I believe,
which is another Netflix show, which I don't think any of us have seen. All I know about it is that I've seen the pilot. It's about, I think it stars some bloke who I don't know, and it co-stars Britta from Community.
Yeah, Gillian Jacobs, is it?
Gillian Jacobs.
Wow, it really sold it to me.
I think it's a man and a woman who break up with the partners at the same time, complete opposites, and then move into like the same apartment block and then like fall in love.
I don't know, man. I saw the adverts a lot when it came out. I know it had 2 seasons. None of us have seen it. It's probably under half an hour.
It will be.
There you go. I think after this, and we've maybe come to the end of our run, haven't we? And I think we should go back. I want to go back to like proper dirty pilots. Like the sets are shaking every time someone closes a door. Pilots.
Network television.
Yes,
that's what we want.
The 90s.
So let's go back to the 90s. We never left the 90s, man. This is the reason we don't do modern stuff, because it really is out of the remit of the whole MO of Pilot Light. Is like, well, if it's not a pilot, if it's not a pilot, what the fuck are we even doing? Like talking for 45 minutes about nothing.
Hey, we did it. We got through it, and I'm proud of us, and I'm proud of the audience mostly for joining us on this journey. Yeah,
and I'd be more proud of us if we can get the flock out of here right now and stop boring people. Right. So we'll see you next week on Pilot Light, where we'll be watching another fucking Netflix show.